Hi, my name is Carson. I'm with Troy. You may know me as Ford on my YouTube channel. I am here with Chad Odom, and he is a self-published author. Chad, will you kind of tell us more about yourself and your books and kind of your journey?
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate the opportunity. Thanks for having me. Really, writing is something I've wanted to do since I was a kid. I've always loved to tell and to hear a good story.
Hmm.
And so I'm not much of an actor. So it came to one of those things where I figured writing would be the medium. And so the long and the short of it is that there's stories rattling around in my head since I was a little kid, and finally decided at one point that I'd put them down on paper. And I actually was traditionally published first through it's actually called a vanity publisher,
Uh-huh.
but went through that route. That was back in 2010, which seems like a really long time ago now.
Yeah.
But that didn't go so well. Ended up that they went out of business, and the struggle to get published traditionally is definitely real. It's out there, and so now I have this manuscript in these books, and I decided that I was going to do it myself, and that way no one ever could go out of business on me again or take control of what I had. And so almost 3 years ago now is when I started on the indie publishing route
Uh-huh.
and doing it on my own. So in the most condensed version possible, that's the story of why I am where I am and how I got there.
I think this is fascinating that you didn't give up. That could be a blow to anybody. And one of the goals is to help other writers and to help inspire them. I think your story is very inspiring because you did have things going on that you're like, oh man, this is going to click, it's going to do well, or you have hopes that it'll go well, but then they fell through. And how devastating was that? Like, were you like, okay, well maybe this isn't for me, or
You know, um, Really, there's definitely the stars aligned in a lot of ways, because when I was growing up as a youth in my church, I had a friend that is now an indie author.
uh-huh.
And so she had some books out there. At the time, she lived in China,
Oh wow.
but my book was going on. And so we would, sort of swap notes, just little
Hmm.
things back and forth. But her publicist somehow, some way, managed to live 3 miles down the road. When it happened, when the publisher went under, there was a little bit of time where I just kind of thought, that was a tried and failed dream. So let's move on. I've got my 9 to 5. It pays the bills. Let's not worry about it anymore.
Right.
And her publicist actually came to me. She knew I was an author, and started to talk to me about the indie side of things and what was involved, and just gave me some of the tips and things that she'd been doing and that she'd learned over the years from working with the other author. And so it kind of it sparked and rekindled that drive in me to tell my story.
Nice.
So I started to take a look into it, and realize that the freedom that I wanted was really there. And I didn't feel like going and finding somebody else again and going through that again.
Uh-huh.
So it sort of worked out right about the same time that things went south with a traditional publisher. Those people happened to be in my life. So
Oh nice.
that's really how it came to be.
Very cool that how things kind of work out like that. So tell us about your series. You have one that's sounds like it's complete, but you might
Mhm.
continue on with it, and then you have a new one that you're writing, The Legends of Vandalur. So let's start with the first one. The last is Archive. Is that
Archide
right?
is correct. Yep.
Okay.
So the last Archide is, I say it's science fiction, but I use that term loosely
Uh-huh.
because it's more science fiction fantasy. Um, I'm Philip K. Dick, where I really have everything worked out and the science isn't perfect. It just says, here's the science, and voila, it works. So that's why I say it's loose science fiction.
Uh-huh.
But the design behind it, my two favorite areas of study, I love history and I love religion. They're my two favorite things in the world to study. And so when we look back on history, we look at, say, Romans or Greeks or any other culture, and their religion that they believed has now become myth. and we tell those stories as myths.
Right.
So I took my own faith, which is Christianity, and I said, well, what if in 1,000 years Christianity is the myth?
Hmm.
What does that myth look like? And what are the themes? What are the key players? Who are the main figures? And how does that all work out? And that was the foundation. And I built a story around that,
Okay.
to really describe. So your main themes are redemption and love, the power of love, what it can do and what it is. But then at the same time, I am a huge, I don't know if you can see everything behind me, but massive nerd. And those are all Legos and they're all Star Wars. And so
Nice.
that's what I grew up with. And so I love that version of storytelling.
Uh-huh.
So I combined history, religion, and religious themes, and sort of took Christianity from, you know, everything is in there if you know what you're looking for. If not, it's just a really solid science fiction story. But it also, again, to condense things down, in this particular story, there's a civilization that's very advanced, but with all of its advancement, it also creates or gives birth to a very evil person. And this person starts to take over and do these things, and they can't stop them. They realize their backs are against a corner, so they detonate a weapon. And what the weapon does, in essence, is it wipes the slate. It takes everything back to its beginning molecules.
Okay.
Before they do that, they launch clones essentially onto the other side of their universe, away from this weapon, so they can start over without this person. So it's that sort of Adam and Eve type scenario.
Hmm.
What they don't realize is that he's found a way to hide. And so the weapon, as devastating as it was, it destroys their civilization, but he's safe.
Oh, wow.
When the series that I'm writing now is complete fantasy, it's not
Uh-huh.
science fiction at all, but I wanted to build, there's a whole universe there to play with. And I wanted to build that, but I wanted to be able to tell any story that I had within that universe. So the second series, Legends of Vandalore, that's out there now, the second book will actually be available here in 10 days. But it's still built in that universe. And what they did to prevent, or to try and prevent, this person actually gives birth to this story. But you don't know that right off the bat.
Okay.
So when you read the second series, they seem completely and utterly detached. And then as it goes on, you start to see the threads that connect the two.
Okay. That's
So
fantastic.
that's the basis, and that's what I've got going right now.
So is the last archive the one that you had sold?
Yeah, the last Archive is the one that was the one that started with the traditional publisher back in 2010.
Uh-huh.
And that is, it was originally supposed to be 3 books. And when I went to do the indie publishing, I broke it up into 5, but I reworked a lot of it, changed a lot of things around, added more detail, and then finished and published it the way that it is now. But that's the one that's finished. It's out there. It's done. And then the Legends is a sort of a spin-off series.
Okay. But fantasy, you don't know they're connected until later on.
Right.
That's fantastic. Let's
Yeah.
let's talk about this control that you have as an indie publisher.
Sure.
So how involved are you when you do the covers? I mean, you have fantastic covers. Do you say like, this is kind of what I want, or do you just hire an artist and they do their thing?
Sure.
And
So really, you have to know, as an indie author, you don't get the privilege of just being able to write. You have to be involved with every piece,
right.
and you have to find good, reliable people. You have to find good editors. You have to find good cover designers. You have to find good formatters, and some of it you wind up doing yourself. I like to draw. I like to sketch. I'm not great at it anymore. It's not really something I practice, but for the covers for the last Archive, it's the genre. You have to know your genre.
Mm-hmm.
So I went looking. I looked at artists. I looked at photo manipulators. I looked at all kinds of different artwork from different people to try and catch the feel that I wanted in those covers. And in all reality, I'm glad they're not out there anymore. But I found someone who is an independent artist, and they did it, and they didn't turn out well. So for about the first 3 or 4 months that they were published indie style, the covers were terrible.
Oh, really?
But I continue to look, continue to search, and I found a particular company called Damonza, Damonza. So a little plug for them there too.
Mm-hmm.
But I started to look at their sci-fi covers, and they were fantastic. So I sketched really briefly what I wanted, and I said, "Here's the elements. Here's what I'm looking for. What do you think?" And they said, "Well, let us shoot this." And they shot it back over to me, and I was blown away with how quick they got it, and it was
Oh, really?
spot on. A couple little changes. So I stuck with them. Then when I went to do Legends, which was fantasy, again, I sketched it out and I sent it to the same people, and they said, "Nope, too specific. We can't do it." So again, started looking at, Facebook and Instagram. A lot of good artists on Instagram, and wound up finding an independent artist who did just amazing work. And I reached out to her. She's actually in Russia.
Oh,
But I
really?
reached out to her and I said, "Here's my sketch. This is what I want. It seems like you do this kind of thing. What do you think?" She said, "Oh yeah, absolutely. Let me take a hold of this." So it really was, I give the very basics, just basic pencil sketches and the feel that I want,
Mm-hmm.
and just some amazingly talented artists who put it together and make that happen.
Yeah, all the covers are beautiful. I was really a fan of them. Your books are also on Audible.
Mhm.
So how did you go about finding a narrator for those?
So honestly, I had never listened to an audiobook in my life.
Oh, yeah?
So I never. So to me, it wasn't really a medium that I considered, because I either read paperback books or I read ebooks.
Uh-huh.
And so that's where I find my books. That's where I'm going to push them. And um, my wife is a big audiobook listener. And so she kind of started talking to me about it. And, you really need to find, I'm like, yeah, that's down the road. I don't want to mess with that right now. And eventually it got to the point where I kind of thought, I'm like, you know what, why am I not opening up this other revenue stream for myself?
Right.
Really is what it boiled down to. So I used Amazon again, ACX, and I went through Audible. And it's funny because I was totally new to the process, trying to figure it out. You essentially take maybe 3 pages of your book and you put it up, and people do auditions. And so I pulled 3 very different sections with three very different feels and personalities to really see. And I thought, maybe after a couple months, I'd have a handful of auditions. I had 48 auditions in 24 hours.
Holy cow.
And I had to stop it. I had to take it down from I'm like, I don't know, how am I going to narrow this down? And so I whittled it down, whittled it down, whittled it down. And ultimately, when I got down to 2 that I liked, I took it to my wife, the publicist that was working with my other friend,
Uh-huh.
and her husband, who are all big audiobook people. And I said, "Okay, you listen to this and tell me which one you think is better." And they narrowed it down, and that's really how that came to be. But what's amazing is it is now probably the most consistent revenue line. It outperforms paperbacks every time. It either paces or eclipses ebook every time.
Oh, really?
So totally worth it. But and now that I've done it, I've probably listened to a dozen audiobooks on my drives.
Uh-huh.
But that's how that came to be.
That's awesome. That's surprising that it outpaces uh paper, your traditionally read books.
Yeah, it surprised me too. Surprised me too.
Because I do
So
listen to quite a bit of audiobooks, but I still like to have the physical form.
me too.
As you can see behind me, I got tons of books.
Yeah, if I moved mine over, it's I've got this. My computer actually right now is set on books to get it up a little bit.
Is it?
So yep.
Um, let's go about some of your habits. Like, what are your writing habits right now?
Um, Really, there's 2 things that I do. Um, Ideas come into my head all the time, and I carry a little 99-cent Walmart notebook. And when I have a random idea, I'll just jot down the basics of it inside that notebook, and I date it. And that's for when the laptop's not in front of me. That's how I do it. Or I'll think of a line of dialogue or a character that might be fun, and that's what I'll do to write down and just keep those things straight. When it comes time to write, there's 2 places that I usually go. My office, which is where I'm at now,
Hmm.
And then I have a basement that is a home theater room. And depending on the movements of my children, I will isolate myself in one of those two spots. I usually turn on, I'm a big fan of film score, classical
Uh-huh.
music, film score, and I'll turn that on to drown out any ambient noise. And then I sit and I write, and it's really, I may have sort of a vague understanding of that chapter or that part and where it needs to go, but I just start to write. I've learned over the years that I just need to get it out of my head,
Uh-huh.
because I can always go back and add or take away after it's out. But if I sit and critique every sentence, it's never going to get written.
Right.
And so I just sit down. I usually clear. I my goal every day is 90 minutes that I
Okay.
write for an hour and a half. 9 times out of 10, that happens from like 10 to 11:30 or 11 to 12:30 at night.
Oh,
But
wow.
so part of it's just a dedication to it, of this is what I'm going to do. It's a discipline. But the other part is get myself alone, get myself where I can really, I think I write visually. So if I'm writing something, I see it like a movie.
Yeah.
And I have to be in a place where my mind can do that without distraction. And that's kind of how I operate.
And are you able to, well, let me back up. Are you a full-time author? Are you able to do it full-time? Do you have a job?
So I have a job.
Uh-huh.
I have a job that pays the bills, but the job, um, I'm at the point where I make enough off of writing that the job is sort of doing this number, right?
Okay. Uh-huh.
So the goal being that, unless I'm absolutely in love with my 9 to 5 job, that within the next few years, that's all I'll be doing is writing.
Fantastic. And that's kind of a struggle. Like, I don't know about you, what time you go to work, but like I have to be at work at 7:30, and like balancing family, writing, your job. That's, I wouldn't be able to write like till midnight at all. So how do you balance all that?
So I'm married. I have 5 kids technically, but 3 are still in the house.
Uh-huh.
And um, luckily they're older. They're all teenagers at the youngest, so they're kind of independent, do their own thing. But I get up every morning about 5:30 and take care of some of the kids. Part of things, I have to be at work. I'm at work by 8, and then I'm home from work around 5:30, 5:45. And then it's really just it's almost like having another job when I get home, because it's, talk to my kids and help them where I can. If my wife and I have something planned, we go. I'm actually finishing up my degree right now, so there's school involved in the mix there. So take care of my homework and my assignments that are due, and then I wait for the rest of the family to be done. So when the kids are in bed, my wife will come upstairs to go to sleep as well. That's sort of my coveted time where I can do it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I've gotten very, very accustomed to 4 or 5 hours of sleep a night. That's the
Wow.
other half of it. So it's taken me a few years, but I can operate pretty well on very short sleep. And, that's, I think the hardest part of it, honestly, is not the timing, is more of the mental aspect, because by the time I get to writing, everyone else has so pulled my attention that my brain is pretty tired
Uh-huh.
by that point. But what writing has become is it's become that escape, because I can sit down and write, and I can be anywhere I want to be with anyone I want to be with at any moment. And so it really has become sort of that icing on the cake for me in the evening that checks my brain from all the other responsibilities and just allows me to soak myself into what I love doing.
Nice.
And honestly, it resets me for the next day too. So
Very cool. For that hour and a half that you get, like, do you have a goal each day? Like, I'm going to write so many words, or do you like, I need to get this scene done, or just 90 minutes, whatever I get done, I get done.
yeah, so 90 minutes is the goal. Some nights I'll sit down, and in an hour I realize that I've written 2 paragraphs.
Uh-huh.
And those are the nights where I kind of realize, it's just not in. And so I'll check out. I don't want to write garbage. I don't want to have something that's so bad that I've really got to rework it later. Other nights I might write for 2 hours if it's really flowing and doing those things. But really, it's when when the imagination stops to produce is when I
Mm,
stop writing.
okay.
So again, I'll start out with something very basic. And then the next thing that I know, I've got this very elaborate thing and I'm really excited about where it's taking me. And I'll just keep going until that energy isn't there, whatever that happens to be. So that's it. There's really not a, I don't try to go by word count, page count, anything. It's just, whatever takes me to that point.
I think a key thing here is consistency. Like if you people think like writing a book is hard, and it is. There's certain challenges of it. But if you can consistently write, say 500, 600 words, which isn't a ton, that's 200,000 words a year. That's two novels.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. It's so much, I think, success, whether you're a traditional publisher, an indie publisher, whether you're a trash man, doesn't matter what you do. A lot of success is just discipline.
Right.
And it's setting goals and then saying, this is what I'm going to do, and disciplining yourself to do it.
Hmm.
And that's 9 times out of 10, that's where people fail. I talk to a lot of other authors,
Uh-huh.
some that are way better than I am and are way better off, and some that are just starting out. And what I see 9 times out of 10 is the ones who are just starting out don't develop that discipline. And especially the indie authors, what I notice is they become more marketers than authors. And but their discipline changes.
Uh-huh.
So, but it very much is about discipline and structure, and that's the key to success in any kind.
Well, being an indie publisher, you also have to kind of be a marketer too. But
Yep.
how do you find that balance?
Well, part of it is help. I definitely rely on people that are smarter than me and do those kind of things and just get me started. But the other part is just research. It's taking my time, whether it's a lunch break or whatnot, to say, I'm noticing ads in these places.
Hmm.
How are they doing that? What are they doing to generate that? Is it worth my time? And I reach out, I try to network with other authors. What are you doing? What's successful? What's not? For the longest time, Facebook was really the place to be.
Uh-huh.
And then recently, with just social media backlash over the past couple of months, it's been a whole lot harder.
Has it?
And so you've had to change the venue and find the readers and really go to them. So there is a lot of homework and research that goes into marketing, just like cover design or editors. You really have to go out there and do your homework, find it, and then a lot of it's trial and error. Try something. If it doesn't work, switch it up, see if you can get it to be productive. And if you can't, move on.
How long do you wait to see if it's being productive? Is it like a week, a month? Like
Usually
when
two
you
weeks at most.
2 weeks at most? Okay.
Yep. Especially almost every place now works on algorithms. So it takes a while for their algorithms. You put in the basic data, and then the algorithms start to place that in front of people better and better based on the responses you get from the people that they put out there. And so you have to let it get started. You have to let it get a little bit of momentum, and you have to put some money behind it,
Hmm.
because like anything else, it's pay per click. And then what you'll start to notice is what's the turnover. So I'm getting 1,000 clicks and one sale, versus another area where I'm getting 1,000 clicks and 20 sales.
Hmm.
And you start to sort of narrow down, and as you get used to looking at them, you figure out how to tweak them
Okay.
and make them more productive and make them work. And then you have to know, I mean, they rise and fall, so they're good for about a month, and then you have to stop them and sort of almost let them go to sleep for a little while, put something else out there, and then give it another little bit of time and recycle those, and they tend to generate a little better.
Kind of like the novelty kind of wears off a little bit, and you kind of have to keep that spark.
Yep. That's a great way to put it. I'm going to steal that from you.
You go ahead. I also like when you said, sometimes when you're writing, just go with the energy and let that flow. I find that people that I've talked to who want to write a book, they analyze every sentence, and you say, you can't do that. For me, when I'm writing, I just have to get it on the page because it's so much easier to steer a car that's moving than when it's stopped.
Yep.
So
Yep.
when you're writing, like when do you go back and do the edits? I know some authors will do that the very first thing when they have their block of time that they're writing. They'll go back and edit the previous days and then continue on. Is that something you do, or do you wait till the very end?
Little combination of both. So I will write one night, and the next night that I go to write, the first thing I do is go back and read what I wrote the night before. And I'll make little tweaks, little adjustments. It just gets my headspace back in where it needs to be to pick up and make that feel fluid.
Uh-huh.
But I don't do any serious editing until it's done. Then I go back, I rework as much as I can. I do, you know, as with any story, as you move along, you realize, man, I really needed this earlier on. And I
Uh-huh.
don't have it. So you have to add those. That's where my little notebooks come in, and I'll make those notes. But again, I wait until it's done. Then I'll go back and I'll make those edits and take care of it and get it to as polished and as perfect, I guess is the word, to tell my story. I'll get it as close to that as I can, and then it'll go through editing rounds.
And as a indie publisher, you kind of have to pick your editors for that as well. You're
Yeah,
really involved
so
in everything.
yeah, it is. So I have a group of about half a dozen people that I know and that I trust. When I finish up a book, they get it. And they're friends, they're family, but they're readers, right?
Uh-huh.
I'm looking for readers. And they will go through, and I've got some that I trust to read it because they have great imaginations. I have some that I trust to read it because they're grammar Nazis and I need it. And they go through with a fine tooth comb and they give it back to me. And then I go and I work through the changes that they've suggested if I want to take them. So it goes through a round of editing from me, 6 other editors that are non-professional,
Uh-huh.
and then back to me for another round of editing before I ever send it over to a professional editor that I'm actually going to pay to do that work. So it goes through a lot of filters to be the best possible quality I can get.
And so after it's gone through that, like, how much does the professional editor change things? Is it
Sure. So editors they're your best friends and your worst enemies. And if anybody's looking into publishing or writing a book and you're going to go the indie route, they are critical pieces to that puzzle. But a good one is going to test you. But a good one also understands that it's your story, not theirs.
Mm-hmm.
So what they're going to do is they're going to go through things and they're going to test every little thing that you do, whether it be something like, I think I've seen that before, or this feels too used, it's recycled, don't do this. Or they'll move into, this is fantastic, maybe try this. This seems out of character. This seems out of place. Why is this here? They just ask a ton of questions. They really put it to the test. Good editors are good readers, and they know what they're looking for, right? As a reader, this is what would engage me.
Right.
And they also know the industry, so they also know what will engage an audience. But it's frustrating because when I get my edits back from them, like, I have to really brace for it because I know it's going to be a ton of work. It's just going to be so much like reading their stuff and going, oh yeah, dang it, I didn't think about that. Or no, you're totally off base. And then I get really mad because, no, this is my story. You don't know what you're talking about. And then I have to come back down to reality and say, but maybe from an audience standpoint, I know it in my head, but I didn't do a good enough job letting the reader know what that's like or what that's going to be. So editors are wonderful. Editors are also completely frustrating, but good ones are worth every single penny that you can find.
And how do you go through and sift to find a good one?
Mine, so I had a couple of editors that they were too easy on me. So I would send it out to them. Really, I mean, Google's your friend. Look them up, find them, just to find a base. And then look at their social media platforms. Look at all, do your own homework and kind of see what other books have they edited? What kind of things have they done to see if it's even in your genre? I don't want to write a science fiction novel and send it to somebody who edits true romance. That's not going to help.
Right.
So that's number one. The first editor I had was it was like, okay, whatever. There wasn't a lot of testing of what I did.
Uh-huh.
So I moved on to another editor, and that editor, his responses to me, if my book was 75,000 words, he had 73,000 words of edits. And it was like, this is just way too time consuming. This is never going to get published if I'm reading just his critique of my work.
Right.
That was too much. And then I happened to have one of my author friends who said, hey, I just took on these new editors. They did a great job. See if they're still looking. And so that one was based on a recommendation, found them, and they've done all of my work since.
Nice.
Yeah.
I guess building a community and knowing other authors helps in that regard.
Very much so. Honest to goodness, I feel like at this point I have sort of a team. They're not necessarily employed by me, but they're definitely my team.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're the ones that I reach out to, and I find them, but I trust them, and I know they do good work, and I know that they take their work with the same level of enthusiasm and professionalism that I do. So I built that, falling and skinning my knees a couple of times, but I've been able to build a pretty good team of people that I know I can work with and that are going to do well.
That's awesome. What are some of your hobbies? I know I could see the Legos in the background. Like,
yeah.
What other do you have other like geeky hobbies that you do?
Oh, sure. So Lego's obviously a big thing to me. They're just a ton of fun. If we do this again in a year, you'll probably see like 10 more out there, because it's definitely a hobby and an expensive one. Right. But I'm a huge movie junkie. 2020 was rough because there weren't a lot of new releases.
Oh, I know.
But I've got some friends of mine. We haven't done it in a while, but we used to do a vlog that was all about watching movies and making fun of stuff. And so we did a lot of that, which was a good time. So, those kind of things, watching and sitting and talking about nothing. Why is this going into depth about some character in a movie? It really doesn't matter. So that's always a really good hobby of mine. I'm what I refer to as a socially acceptable nerd, because as much as I love Legos and movies and writing and reading and playing Pathfinder, Dungeons and Dragons, so there's, I guess you could toss it into another one. I love board games, and those things are all big. But I'm also a big sports fan. So I mean, I've got my hockey jersey, my hockey hoodie on. So I do love to play sports. I love to watch sports. I love to be out and to be active, and I have a son who's really involved, and so I love to go watch him too. But really, from a hobby standpoint, it's anything that gets my imagination moving, because you find inspiration in the strangest of places.
Right.
When I write, I've pulled things from books, video games, movies, board games, pictures, drawings. So anything that distracts my brain enough to get the creative juices flowing, that's what I like to do.
And it was a young age that you started this. I read on your bio that you read The Hobbit at age 8.
Yeah. So I was a pretty lonely kid. Got picked on a lot, very introverted, very by myself. And so really it got to a point where, and my sister would attest to it, that the only friend I had was my neighbor's cat. So really, movies and books became my best friends, because the 80s and early 90s. And but it was storytelling, and I loved those stories. So I just picked up books, and I got into graphic novels and comic books. That was a big thing for me growing up. But then I have an uncle. My dad's also a very big reader. He was a school teacher, so he's a very big reader, and he used to turn me on to things. And but then I had an uncle who was just a big fantasy nut, and he saw some of the stuff that I was reading and was like, "Hey, try this." And I read The Hobbit and got completely hooked on the imagery of it. And then, of course, moved into Lord of the Rings. And Lord of the Rings, I read it every single year of my life from 10 until 30. So read it every year. And then, I got into the Shannara series when they were big. I started to find the Ender's Games, anything that I could read that was more than just one book. I really wanted something I could get into and read over the long run.
Sink your teeth into.
Exactly. Yeah. Anybody can tell a story. And I think that's where indie publishing is so wonderful, because everybody has a voice and can tell their story. but to create something is a whole different side of people's brains that not everybody can use.
Right.
So I loved to get into something where an author has created a world, a universe. That's what hooked me. So Tolkien was big. Orson Scott Card was big. Um, I didn't really get into, your a lot of the short story type stuff. I didn't get into it until I was much older because it was almost like, nah, it's too short for me. I can't read that.
Right.
But yeah, that's really what it came down to is good influences, good family who kept recommending the next thing for me to read.
Uh-huh. It's kind of my journey too. Like I read The Hobbit when I was 10, 9, 10,
Yeah.
something like that, fourth, fifth grade. And my best friend who lived across the street was a year older than me, and he was reading the Shannara series, and so he gave me the Sword of Shannara.
Yep.
And then he moved me into Piers Anthony. Then I got into Wheel of Time came out when I was probably in sixth grade.
Yep. Wheel of Time was another one that I read a lot of. Um, I don't know if you've read them at all, but big John Carter fan, John Carter of Mars by Edgar Rice Burroughs.
Right. I
Um,
haven't read them yet.
yeah, if you watch the movie, don't let that be your judge because it's not as good. But they're 10 books and they're only 150, 200 pages a piece. So they're
Yeah.
real quick reads. But again, the world building was so outstanding that
Mhm.
I had to keep going.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. Orson Scott Card was a big influence on me too. In fact, my second son is named Ender.
Nice.
Yeah. And
My
we call our third son because he has some genetic disorders and he's so much smaller than everybody else. We just call him Bean.
Bean.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So we got Ender and Bean. So
Yeah, I had a my first son is named after my best friend growing up.
uh-huh.
And but when my wife was pregnant with it turned out to be twins and it was two boys. Well, I only had one boy name picked out.
Uh-huh.
And so I was driving home one day and my wife was 8 months pregnant and very emotional. And me being me, I was picking on her on the phone saying, you're gonna be, so doped up, I'm gonna name our kid Chewbacca. And she was like, no, no. And I said, yeah, don't worry about that. He'll be Obi-Wan, just going through. And finally I said, that's okay, he'll be Luke. And it went silent. And my wife said, I like Luke. I said, me too. So the twin is named Luke because I was prattling off Star Wars names and we both found one we liked. So
Fantastic. That's awesome.
yeah. Yep.
So after you kind of got hooked on this fantasy journey that you were on, like when did you decide, you know what, I want to try writing?
I started writing almost the same time I started reading.
Really?
So I would write little stories. I was a big Batman fan. Like you can see the Batwing there in the background. Again, big comic book fan. And so I would make up comic book characters.
Mm-hmm.
And I would make up their superpowers and their backstory and their, affiliations and who they were connected to. And that's really what started it was making my own comic books.
Nice.
And then I had a friend that I would sit and we'd try and draw them. And of course they were very rudimentary stuff, but that's where it started. And when I was, I don't know, about 10, maybe 11, I had a dream. And in the dream, it was, I could still see it. I'm a lot older than 10. But I remember in the dream that there was a person standing in the middle of this valley of snow. And this horn sounded and all of these people came charging in on him in this valley. And I heard this sound like thunder and this wave went out from it. And when it was gone, just he was left again. Everybody was gone.
Uh-huh.
And that was the thing. I woke up and I wrote it down, but it's actually what became the last Archive eventually.
Really?
Is just that one dream that the visual was so cool in my head and the dream was so vivid that's what started me to create the story that eventually became the last Archive.
That's awesome. And that was when you were, what did you say, 10, 11?
Oh yeah, I was 10. And I can tell you that if you go onto my website, there's one of them where you can go and actually see some of the drawings that I did when I was little.
Uh-huh.
And they're all on, lined paper because it's all I had. And, but you can see it was a fantasy story because that's what I read. It was not science fiction at all. But it just I kept trying to work it into a story, that scene. And that was the thing that stuck. So, yeah.
I read also that you're in the Army.
It was, yeah, real brief. I joined the Army right after high school
Uh-huh.
and did that. But I was in for a short enough period of time because I wanted to serve a mission for my church. So I graduated when I was 17 and I had to be done with that when I was 19. So it was all pre 9/11. It was all those things. There was nothing real glamorous about it by any stretch. It was
Uh-huh.
all in the States. Um, but it was one of those things that I despised school as a kid
Uh-huh.
and didn't want to go to college, but wasn't much of a mechanic or a handyman. So my options were limited. And on top of that, I was always an outdoors kid. I loved to camp. I loved to go shooting. I loved to do those things. And so, yeah, the Army was where I went and loved that experience too. I learned a lot, grew up a lot, matured a lot. So
So did any of that influence The Last Archive?
absolutely. Um, the first two books of The Last Archive, from the first two to the last three, the book changes very dramatically
Uh-huh.
because the first two books it's almost based on sports. And then it melds over into how the main character, whose name is Orion, he goes through it and then gets involved with the military. There's a world war that breaks out during his time in athletics, and it transitions over to him. And so a lot of what you read is, when he's going through essentially basic training, what you read in there is either what I went through or as I was talking to the guys that I was with that went on to do special forces and those kind of things, the stories that they would tell me. And then as it gets into the actual war, some of what's in there is stories. A real big influence on my life growing up was a gentleman named Ted Loney who passed away in the early 90s, but he was a Marine in World War II.
Oh, really?
And my dad was smart enough to sit down with him back in the 80s and
Mm-hmm.
record all of his experiences from World War II. And I've watched them and listened to them a lot of times. But a lot of those stories, they're actual real stories.
Uh-huh.
I just put them in this fictional setting.
Oh, nice.
So yeah, the Army had a huge influence on that part of things. And I've actually had some guys that are vets that'll reach out to me and ask me that question because like, man, this was just, and I said, yeah, that's because I experienced at least that much of it.
Right.
Enough to get a feel for it and be able to put that down.
I love how real world experiences can influence you in different ways.
Yeah.
So if people want to reach out to contact you or get a hold of you or learn more about you, how can they do that?
So the easiest way you can visit, you can find me on social media. It's Chad R. Odom. So like facebook.com/Chad R. Odom. Instagram is the same. I have a website, chadrodom.com. There's a contact page that you can fill out if you want there. You can message me on any of those platforms. And then the email address that's up and running that I've had for the longest, it's very simple, thelastarchive@gmail.com. Those are the ways to get in touch with me. But I part of an indie author is I try to be really, really active with my audience.
Mm-hmm.
So if you message me or if you want to ask a question or talk, I am going to respond to you, and it's me. It's not somebody else. I don't have anybody else that does that. That's me. So, if you have questions or you want to tell me that you loved it, great. If you want to tell me where I could have done a whole lot better, fantastic. I'm always up for those kind of things. And again, you will get a response from me, and I try to make that turnaround as quickly as I can.
Perfect. And I appreciate your agreeing to do this interview with me a lot.
Yeah. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for listening to the Troy Podcast. Please subscribe, like, and share with your friends.